Okay, hopefully this works. Starting a little bit early. I'm on a roll. next time I start late, you guys will let me have it. How's everyone doing? Let me know how the audio levels are. If there's any clipping or any issues like that, or anything's out of sync. You guys know the drill. Because yeah, this is just it's just me, and I have nobody monitoring, so I rely on you guys. As we get going here, good to see everybody in the chat already. Scott Pledger, nice to see you. Looks, I don't know, YouTube tells me that stream health is good. Let's double check. No dropped frames. I've not listened to the LSA HP2. I still have the HP1 here. I got to send that back. Yeah, I am not. It's not for me. Those the Kennerton headphones. They don't do anything particularly offensive, but they're also. I don't think they're as competitive as like the LCD-X. I think one of the problems that we this is something that I've been meaning to talk about eventually, but one of the problems that I often see is people will get very excited or defensive or passionate about a particular headphone that they happen to own, and they think that it is proportional with the price tag that it's at. Now, in my opinion, the price tag is perhaps a necessary condition for the sound quality to be good or to be, at a particular level, but it's by no means a sufficient condition. So what do I mean by that? Just because something is $2,000 or, $1,000 or $3,000 or even $500 doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to perform at that level or be competitive at that level. The flip side is that if you want to make a headphone that is like the best ever headphone, or a high-end flagship, it is still going to cost a certain amount of money to be able to get it done. So if you do want to have a really high-end headphone, yes, there is a necessary condition there of a certain cost, but just because it is a certain price doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be proportional to the sound quality that it has or competitive for that price. And in many cases, people who are very excited or passionate about the headphone that they bought, or even headphone that they're considering because it's at a given price tag, it's the first headphone that they bought, or it's one of only a few. And I was in that position myself. That's why I know about this. It's sort of like a lens looking back at like some of the original reviews that I did and previous reviews that I did. Where I didn't have the experience that I do now. And so I didn't have that same sense of like what stuff should be at. And I mean, even just like, 3 years ago, like on my old channel, I'd have a sense because I listened to the 650, I listened to the Sandara, and like a bunch of those other like more entry level headphones. And I didn't really have that like, I guess, breadth of knowledge that was required to know what stuff was supposed to sound like at a given price tag, or what would be competitive at a given price tag for various different qualities, like, well, everything to do with tonal balance, but also all the technical performance stuff like detail and all that, and even like being able to identify what a limit on something like microdynamics might be, like micro detail and trailing ends of tones, and how that actually does correlate to detail. Or it's one of the things that I would say contributes to it probably more significantly than anything else. Until having had the extremes of both of those, on the blunted side it's the Drop Panda, and on the resolving side it's something like a Focal Utopia, or like the extremes of those really reveal the differences to you. And so that's why I'd say when you have a certain expectation of how something should perform, it becomes really difficult to becomes difficult to be confident about that when you don't have the breadth of experience with a wide range of equipment. So that's why I don't know. Not everybody's fortunate to be able to do that, right? And of course, I am, and other people who are doing reviews here are. And so, whenever this pandemic stuff is, when the world improves, let's say, and you really want to be able to try and make those judgments for yourself, the only way to do that, I think, is to go to a location or somewhere, or maybe go to a show, a Can Jam or something like that, and try and see if you can get that breadth of experience as well. Because it really is tough. If for most people who don't have this, who are not fortunate, to be able to try all this stuff, maybe you don't have a local shop near you or something like that, right? So that's kind of my thoughts on that. And I think, in the case of the Kennerton stuff, it's in a price range that is hyper competitive, and if it doesn't do anything special there, which I kind of think that's where it's at. At least with this particular one. No, I don't know about the HP2, but typically what I've found with those is that if they're not doing anything special, a lot of the, I guess, excitement that gets generated behind them is due to confirmation bias and the price tag, which is fine, but I'd like to think that we can have somewhat of a hierarchy of stuff that is maybe a little bit more independent of price, if that makes sense. But I see a bunch of super chats here, so I'll get to that. Sorry. I hope that answers that question a little bit. Jason Berger, thank you. Best Slam headphone. I've got the Clear and the Radiance. Those are two of the best. For lots of Slam. The Utopia is also not as far as base level. Actually, here's something interesting people don't realize. The Utopia is not a bright headphone. The Utopia actually has the same base level as the Clear, and people don't realize that. I don't know why there's this narrative that the Utopia is bright or that the bass rolls off, because it sure doesn't on this one. And I can show you the frequency response. This is and it's actually warmer, a little warmer than the Target in the treble. So I would say this is actually a Slammin' headphone. By the way, nice to see Metal571 in the chat. I'm thinking of, so for dynamic driver headphones, the Focal stuff hits real hard. But for planars, man, does the HE6 ever hit hard. The original HE6. I think the LCD4 is also up there for Slam. So if you're looking for Slam, dynamic is probably the way to go there. Some of the Fostech stuff hits pretty hard. ZMF stuff is pretty punchy there too. Why do I keep hearing about some kind of Aria 2 rumors? I haven't heard anything about that. You know more about Hi-Fi Man than I do. I'm, Sankar's my best friend now. Just kidding. I haven't heard anything about that. I do know that there was a revision to the Aria a while ago, and they changed the dust cover, and they stopped painting the magnets. But I think that was just a silent revision, and then that was what Fang told me about at Can Jam. But I don't know anything about a SE or a version 2. But it wouldn't surprise me, Hi-Fi Man's coming out with a lot of headphones these days. Paul, thank you. Under 1,000, need texture body kick drums to sound like kick drums and not like skin is not taut. So you got tight bass. Yeah. Get an LCD2F. It's the best headphone under 1,000 right now. Not LCD2 Classic, LCD2F. Rob Hawk, thank you. Rob, again, you got to type it in the little chat box when you're doing that, because otherwise I don't see your question. I do see it now though. But which do you prefer, U12T or the Mest? U12T for sure. Congrats on the new house, Scott. Oh, yeah. If you got a new house, congrats. Yeah, DSP becoming more common is inevitable. I agree. Um, it's funny though. Like, I think if anything, DSP and closebacks is going to be showing up more. Like, because closebacks have these challenges when trying to tune them. That if you just use DSP there, it could probably fix a lot of those challenges. But honestly, even the Odyssey LCD X and XC, my understanding is they used analog filters there for the tuning as well. So it's not just digital signal processing, but actually analog filters to make some change there. Some sort of that kind of stuff I think is bound to happen. Impressions on the HER10P. I only had the one in, and I think they sent that back because they weren't sure if it was representative. I posted my measurements and impressions on the Headphone Community Forum in the R10P thread, but it had detail for sure and pretty crazy soundstage. But man, was the tuning ever weird! Like, just not okay. Like, you can't have a headphone be tuned like that and sell it at $5,000. It's just not. That's not okay. So maybe maybe it was just something wrong with the unit, and maybe it actually does measure sound different. So we'll have to wait and see. Jeff, thank you. Wow, that's very generous. Thanks for the shows. Keep them coming. Will do, my friend. Thank you. I think it'll be considered fairly sacrilegious, but once it starts becoming more common in higher end products, I think it'll spread even more. You're talking about DSP, yeah. Well, the Sonoma Model 1 did that, if I remember correctly, with the amp unit. It was an E-stat, that the Warwick Acoustics thing. It was an E-stat that was pretty close to Harmon. I think they didn't quite get it right though with the tuning. Like, it's close, but there's some stuff in the treble that I think they just actually tried to get it to match Harmon, which probably you shouldn't do. Like, and this is something that actually Matt and I've been talking about, but you probably should. And I completely agree with the idea of headphones should be evaluated against the Harmon target, and shown represented that way, or some version of it, but they shouldn't necessarily be tuned to match it, because there are places where you don't actually want it to match, and that's largely because the target is a very coarse grained target, and your actual frequency response for headphones is way more fine grained than that. So there's going to be places inevitably where matching it might actually make it worse. Smoothness, I'm told is fine, but so for example, 9K, that you want there to be a dip there, and I think actually 9-10K, that's probably where that Sonoma Model 1's a little hot. But for the rest of the tuning there, it's actually pretty solid. Oh, you saw rumors on Headphone? I don't know, man. There's I need to remind myself to not go too far into the weeds on a lot of those threads, because you can just read for hours and there's so much conversation there. Could you do a full review on the Reveal Plus software, including HRT in the studio rooms? Probably not, because it doesn't seem like, at least so far, it doesn't seem like the Reveal stuff has been congruent with the timing for Odyssey's releases. I know they're a small team, and I think they're probably trying to do that, but it's a lot. And they have a bit of an issue with the fact that So Odyssey's made revisions to their headphones over the years, right? And so you have multiple versions of an LCD X that have very different tunings, or LCD 2 that have very different tunings. And so how do you develop a DSP that has those individual models without being so specific that it becomes confusing for people? How do you develop a DSP that's going to cover all of that? I don't think you can, because the tunings are so different. Now, what I think they probably should do is just list which model year, and then have DSP that, in Reveal Plus that corresponds to that respective model year. But actually, thankfully, with the newer ones, you don't need to EQ them, or at least it's much better than it used to be. So maybe the Reveal Plus would be more appropriate for like the older stuff. But yeah, I've stopped using Reveal Plus just because it's good that they provide it. I like that idea, and I think more headphone companies should adopt that approach. But because of the various different revisions that exist, it's too conservative and sometimes just flat out wrong. What headphones do you like most out of the Euphoria? It's tough because the Euphoria is one that it does have pretty high output impedance there. So when I use something like the Focal Utopia, which has an impedance bump there at around, I don't remember, I think it's around 50 hertz, it gets super bassy, and to the point where I just think it's too much. I think Taryn probably likes that because he's a massive bass head, but for me, it's too much. So I think probably it would be something that would do well with like a HD 600 maybe, or it would do well with the HD 800S or something like that. Something that's a little higher impedance. Maybe something from ZMF. That would probably be pretty good. The nice thing about the Utopia or the Euphoria, is that it's a really nice tube amp that is not particularly, it's not finicky or picky in the sense of like noise floor. So it's a very clean noise floor free amplifier. And a lot of those like little quirks that exist with tube amplifiers don't exist with the Euphoria. And I like that. Now with that said, as far as having something affect the sound, unless you're doing some sort of synergy pairing stuff with that particular output impedance and headphones that you're trying to boost the bass on, I do think that the amps and sound stuff has more tube character. At least that's been my experience so far. But they are also then a little bit more on the picky side, or at least on the more traditional tube finickiness side of things, where if you don't have the right synergy, if you don't have the right pairing there, there's always a risk of a bit of noise floor. Like for example, running the Verite off the 300 ohm out, it sounded great, but there was a little noise floor there. So that's why you got to be a little bit more intentional with your pairing with the amps and sound stuff. But that's not a bad thing. I think it's a matter of figuring out what the right synergy is. Whereas the Euphoria, it's like, you can run most stuff off of it, and the synergy issue isn't really one that you need to consider unless you have these lower impedance headphones. Thanks for the answer on the Reveal Plus. Odyssey did tell me they will release a new EQ profile for the 2021 LCD-X, but didn't say when. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I just hope that they demarcate that from the previous one, because an EQ profile that you'd make for the 2021 version would not be applicable to the older ones. Here's a good question. Can your IHA6 drive the HE6? Or it really needs a speaker amp to power? Okay, so the narrative that the HE6 needs a speaker amp is false. And you can actually see there's like the reason why people think that is because there is a canonical, use of the HE6 with speaker amps. And that was back in 2011, when there weren't that many high-end headphone amplifiers that could power it sufficiently. These days, there are so many more amplifiers because it was almost like an arms race with the HE6, and it was like, okay, this is the headphone that takes the most power. Let's all try and make amplifiers that specific, like headphone amplifiers that can power it. And so you have now a ton of amplifiers, headphone amplifiers that can actually power the HE6. Where before you didn't. And the narrative that you need a speaker amp really does come from those older days where you didn't have that available. And now there's people who will perpetuate that narrative or continue to goalpost shift on those and say, no, you're not driving it correctly. Like, no, like these days you have headphone amplifiers that have like 14 watts or something ridiculous. Like, That's way more power. Like the HE6 doesn't even need that. Like if you have, I'll say like if you have an amplifier that has more than like 3 watts, you'll probably be fine. 4 watts, 5. Like there's a lot of headphone amplifiers out there that can technically drive the HE6. Now the question that I think is maybe a more nuanced one is whether or not you might want to drive the HE6 with a speaker amplifier. And in that sense, I think the answer is probably yes. But in that case, it's more of an evaluation of a combination of things, of a specific chain, like a given speaker amplifier and a given headphone. And that's because the HE6, and I'm completely stealing this from Android. The HE6 does take on the character of the amplifier more than other headphones do, and for that reason, you may want to then use a speaker amplifier that you happen to like. And so really, that's the reason why I think it's not bad to look into speaker amps if you have a HE6 or Susvara or any of that kind of stuff. But do you need it? Absolutely not. That's just not true. What is your favorite headphone amplifier and why is it the Topping A90? Oh God. My favorite headphone amplifier. Like full desktop amplifier. Okay, so my favorite headphone amplifier is actually the IFI Diablo. No, I'm just kidding. This is actually really nice though, convenient and portable and lots of power. But I kind of think I don't know. I like the micro black label, like the all the different little functions that you had on it, and I bet the signature is even better. I like that kind of stuff with these smaller form factor ones, but this one actually, it looks just like a little battery bank, power bank type thing. So lots of power there. No, my favorite headphone amplifier right now, it's not what I'm using right now. I think it depends on the headphones, but as a good value solid headphone amplifier that is all you really need, I would say the Rebel amp. But the problem with the Rebel amp is that it's quite large, so if you don't have the desk space for the Rebel amp, then yeah, that's tough. But yeah, that would be my go-to recommendation there. And then for planars, the IHA6 is probably my favorite for like from the balanced output for inefficient planars, specifically the balanced output, and that's because it's a high current amplifier. Anything that needs a ton of power, because that has a ton of power. And I also like that it sounds weird to say, but that the IFI Pro ICANN was also really convenient as a reviewer, because it's just so versatile, with all the various different functions and features that it has, along with the tube modes and all this other stuff, and it's really good for both high like power hungry headphones and sensitive IEMs. So the Pro ICANN is a solid option there. I'm trying to think if there's other amps that I really like. For dynamic driver headphones, the Phonitor stuff is pretty good. I like the high impedance dynamic driver headphones. So yeah, that's the thing, is I don't really get into the amp stuff all that much because it makes such a small difference. I mean, yeah, my favorite amplifier would probably be the amps and sound, just the amps and sound stuff in general, but some pairing with the amps and sound stuff. But that's like tube amps, right? Hi there, I've been Googling a lot, but death metal is an uncommon genre. So what kind of headphone driver would you recommend for very fast technical death metal? I recommend a planar, and I recommend a warm planar. Something like a Rad Zero, something like a Odyssey LCD-X, something like, actually not even an LCD-X, because it's not really warm anymore because they've kind of fixed the tuning. So an EQ'd Odyssey LCD-X, just boost the bass, add a bass shelf, make it a little warmer. LCD2F with a bass shelf. Yeah, you want, I would get into EQ a little bit and then just boost up the stuff below 200 hertz there, because and you don't want it to be super treble like intensive. So yeah, a warmer planar is what I would go with, and that's why I was the Rad Zero actually. It's just expensive though, so like keep that in mind. But yeah. Let's get into some more questions here, guys. I was interested in it also for movies and gaming. Oh, interested in what? I'm not sure what that's in reference to. They're supposed to be working on new sets of profiles. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. Oh yeah, LCD XC and all that stuff. Yeah. I haven't heard the Burst and Soloist and any of the Burst and stuff, but we do have one in the office, and I haven't stolen it from Taryn yet, so it probably needs to happen at some point. DACs and amps do make a massive difference. In 2 years, you will likely look back and say, I can't believe my favorite amp was the Rebel amp. So I've actually gone the other way. When I was like getting into this stuff, I mean, I do agree, DACs and amps make a difference, but not that much. Once you're at a sufficient point, like once you're at the good enough point, they don't really make that much difference, unless you're talking tube amps, and then it's like, okay. The thing is, and I'm quoting actually from Ian on this, because he made a good point. They don't make that much difference, but when you do notice the differences that they do make, suddenly you feel like that difference matters a lot more. And I think that's specifically true with DACs, where, going from a Burr Brown to an AKM to an ESS, so for the off-the-shelf DAC chips, when you notice what those differences are, then suddenly you go, oh yeah, that does make a difference. And to that I have to agree, but proportional to the amount of money that you would spend on headphones, no, they do not make that kind of difference. So I see it like there's a lot of questions like you guys have, like what amp is good for this, what DAC is good for that, and you could spend the $500 or $1,000 on the DAC and the amp or whatever, or you could just buy a better headphone with that money and then get a lower end amp or lower end DAC, and it would ultimately be a better combination. So now the flip side there is if you already know that the headphones that you have are the perfect headphones for you, then yeah, it does make sense to look into amps and DACs and get that last the last two pieces of the chain. So yeah, I mean, and it does make a difference. But like, so for example, way back when I was getting into it, I was doing those comparisons with like shit amps, and I had a Micro Black Label. I still have it. I lent it to my brother, but lots of different amps and things like that. And I was focused a lot on what those differences were, but having way more experience with a wider range of like, well, both headphones, but also amps and DACs now, it's like the range of improvement is like nothing compared to the range of improvement that you get from going from one headphone to a higher end headphone, potentially, depending on the headphone, of course. But I will say, like, if you're not driving, if you're only using like one of these things, something like this, like a little portable DAC amp combo, moving up to a full size desktop amplifier and DAC stack thing, yeah, that's going to be that's going to make a pretty significant difference. Like, I remember even back when I had the FIO E10K or one of those FIOs, it's like the biggest difference that I noticed with that stuff is that like the soundstage on those smaller things with the like just op amp based stuff, it's super narrow and tight, and then as soon as I go to like a proper full size amplifier setup, even an entry level one, or not entry level, but like a THX or something that's like, I don't know, like foundational solid, even a shit Magni 3 Heresy or something like that. It's suddenly like, oh, this is much more like correct sounding. So yeah, in that sense, I think it's a massive difference. Massive is the wrong word, but it's a significant enough difference where you would want to do that. But then between those and like even the Rebel amp, it's not it's not that crazy of a difference. But the Rebel amp is like what I would consider like the mid-range benchmark there for an amplifier. I agree with max settings on that. For planars, for me, it's still the IHA6, but I think you could get away with those THX amps, with the balanced output there as well, the 789 and stuff like that. They're not as engaging sounding, but I think they would do as far as the power requirements. Same with the Magnius. Let's see, what else? What are we going to talk about? Dangerous convert. Yeah, so I've been talking with Flux about that. I gotta try that stuff. There's a lot of that stuff where it's like there are these more like kind of niche amps and DACs and stuff that I do want to try. Stuff that's a little bit that's less like off the shelf. Yeah, I do want to try that stuff. Because I think that's where stuff really does start to make a difference. But then we're talking, fairly high price tags. But that's why again I'm talking like the under 1,000 stuff. Is it really worth going from a $300 amp to a $1,000 amp? Really depends on the amp, but generally no. When you can buy a $1,000 headphone that's going to sound better off of the $300 amp. Would a clear OG be a good complement to the Ananda LCD XC and HD 600, or kind of redundant sound signature? I want to make my next headphone totally different. Maybe HD 100S. Actually, both of those would be good complements to that. But the clear OG would actually be, I think, a better complement because that's the one that has all the dynamics, like all the punch. And it is a bit warmer there with a little bit more vocal, like the 1.5K region is like a little forward, so it pronounces vocals a little bit more. So yeah, I think clear OG. Whereas Ananda, LCD XC, HD600, they're all actually kind of similar in the sense that they all have a generally balanced frequency response there. As long as it's the 2021 XC, which I think you have, Mr. New York Rangers. I'm still bitter about 1994. No, actually, I like the Rangers. They're one of my favorite teams. Apart from Messier. I hate Messier. But that was from back then. I'm a Canucks fan. What can I say? You gotta hate Messier. And I think the HD100S, while not like those other ones, because it's a bit more shifted towards the treble, like rather than ear gain being around 3K, it's at 4K and up. It's not different enough from those other ones. Where I think the clear would be, as far as the rest of the presentation. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the Catastone 2 Pro simply as a DAC? Probably better, yeah. But then it's like you're already buying a discrete. You're buying you're using a DAC amp combo as a discrete part of the system, so why not just buy a DAC? What is the best headphone and IEM for classical music, especially for strings? But thanks so much for your excellent reviews. You're very welcome. So IEM, I'm gonna say the Empire Ears Odin. It's ridiculously expensive, and for headphone, half MN Sesvara. But I mean, if you're thinking about like attainable headphones, maybe the Aria or HD100S. But probably Aria would be my preference there. Let's see. Would you consider the original Focal Clears to be complementary pair to the HD100S for non-acoustic music? You mean like electronic music? Probably, yeah. Got Kine IHA6. Will it be too much to drive Focal Radiance via XLR? I would not pair the Radiance. No, don't do that. The problem with the IHA6, I know like it's an amplifier that I like, but it is specifically for inefficient planar magnetic headphones. And if you want to mess with output impedances for like an HD100S or something like that. So it's too much power for sensitive headphones. Let me just like say that as clearly as I can. Like if you have low impedance headphones, do not run them off the balanced output because you will get noise floor. You could run them off of the 10 ohm out single-ended, yeah, but then you're missing the whole point of the amplifier, and there's no reason for you to have the IHA6. The IHA6 is built specifically for the HE6, Hi-Fi Mensesvara, those types of headphones. Production Rescue, thank you. Have you done EQ curve for the LCD MX4? I have the 2021 LCD X and the MX4 in my possession right now, and I'm utilizing your curve for the LCD X. I want to compare them both calibrated. I have not heard the MX4. I've heard it once at a store a long time ago, but I have not had it in, and yeah, so I can't really comment on that. One thing that I'm told though, and again, somebody can verify this, but I'm told that they did change the pads on the other headphones as well, their other full size ones. So I would imagine that there is a similarity there between those two. But obviously they'd be using different drivers, but yeah, I think you'd probably not need to adjust as much as maybe you would in the past with the MX4. But maybe I'll get one in and find that that's not true. So, casual utopia for stream. That's right. This is my favorite dynamic driver headphone. I mean, I know I like the ZMF Verite, especially with tube amps and things like that. And there are things about the Verite that I like better, but for detail and punch, this is still the best. And I like the tuning of the Utopia better. Sundara is what you're looking for? Yeah, Sundara is solid. Sorry, I root for the Canucks in the playoffs. Oh man, they are not doing well this year. They need to get rid of their GM. From the 5.8X, yeah, Sundara. Like, that's funny. I think DMS has a 2020, whenever the recent Hi-Fi Man Sundara is the latest. And I think so he's probably going to come up with a review soon. But yeah, it's nice to see that there's more people now actually talking about the new revision of Sundara. Because for a long time, reviewers only had the old one. So, sorry about the 94 Cup, nice rant, yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, we sent you a nice coach there for a little bit and took you guys to the finals. No, we didn't. We didn't have anything to do with that, but yeah, there's a similarity there, I think. I'd love to go see a hockey game at MSG. That'd be awesome. I have not tried any of the Bryson stuff. Have you tried to EQ electrostatic headphones? No, because the one that I reviewed didn't really need EQ. There was already DSP going on in there, so I guess technically it was an EQ'd electrostatic headphone. Yeah, Clear's a good upgrade. Original Clear. I mean, that's like. Also, that's probably the best dynamic driver headphone under $1,000. Because it's now at like, yeah, just under 1,000, I think. Just purchased the LCD X, the clamp really tight against my upper jaw. That doesn't sound right. Where did you get it from? Is it the latest? Is it a 2021 version? Thoughts on the Kennerton Magni Gallery? I talked about that earlier. Yeah, I think that they don't, at least the one that I have here. It's not that it does anything particularly bad. It rolls off in the bass and the treble a bit, so it's a bit mid forward, right? So it's not as well extended there, but it has ear gain, and so it is an option. I think The problem was that they did some front damping on the driver, and so it's a little blunted sounding on the micro dynamics and micro detail. But overall, it's not bad. It's just like not as competitive as like an LCD X. And so I think that's the thing, is like stuff isn't necessarily priced proportionally. That's really my only issue with them. And to be fair, if you make something and you think it's awesome and you think it's the greatest, then you're bound to like it. But you're bound to want to price it at higher than maybe where it's appropriate. But I think the people who are making that stuff aren't necessarily the people who are evaluating everything. So. Would you never recommend Army ADI2? No, I recommend the ADI2. I think it's great. You get all EQ functions in there. It's solid. What is the best headphone for listening to a hockey game? HD100S? Probably not. I don't think it matters. The sound is not. If you want to pick up all of the like little expletives, that especially when the arenas are empty, maybe. How contagious is the current strain of ear fungus that is circulating? I have no idea. Oh my god. Had to return the 2020 LCD-X due to my ear touching the phaser. I don't think it's touching the phaser. I think it'd probably be touching the cloth material on the inside. Because the phaser, my understanding, I've taken the back off. You can actually see the phaser there on the back. So I don't think it would be the phaser that's touching. Unless you mean just that structure. Yeah, Nando would be solid there for good stage and game. Well, I don't know. I almost think like for gaming, you do want something like a DT1990 Pro, even though I don't think it's a particularly good headphone for music, because it is that the sibilant tones are very pronounced, and that might be something that would actually help you. And the soundstage is pretty good, and the imaging is pretty accurate there, so more accurate than I think planar is typically. So I think that probably would be the way to go, if for like a competitive advantage. But I don't think I would ever want to listen to that headphone for music. What else would be good there? Around $700. It's not that much. That has like crazy soundstage, not like an HD100S, maybe something from maybe the Harmonic 9 Zeus. It's got a good soundstage. It's not that expensive, but the bass is a bit crazy there. So if you want lots of bass and warmth, then maybe Harmonic 9 Zeus, because it's pretty detailed. I would say Focal Alex for punch, but the soundstage isn't very big on that one. So yeah, maybe a DT 1990 there. I feel weird recommending that, but yeah. LCD4 has virtually identical detail to the Susvara with more bass emphasis, but $2,000. Oh wait, what? Yeah, $2,000 less. Yeah, because the Susvara is $6,000. So ridiculous. Yeah, I've noticed this. There's a similarity there between like among those crazy high end planars, like Susvara, Abyss, AB1266, even the Diana to a certain extent, Diana Phi. Not the regular Diana V2, but the Diana Phi and the LCD4. To a lesser extent, the D8000 Pro and the HE1000 SE. There is something about the microdynamic clarity, the clarity there for the trailing end of tones that is uniquely above the rest of the headphones out there. Like, it's just, there's something about the way that those are able to do that. I mean, same thing with the original HE6, not on that level, but it does it the ability to sort of resolve those finer little nuances and details in the trailing ends of tones and small gradations of volume. And it's not like I just say small gradations of volume, it's clarity for trailing ends of tones. That is just on another level with those. And it's almost like there's like a specific demarcation line for like the crazy flagship high-end planars and like the rest of the headphones below it, because an Aria, for example, is not close to a Susvara or even an HE1000 SE, even though it's good. It's got really good depth and stuff, and it's detailed, but not like those. Have you wait? DT 1990 treble is super grainy to my ears. Yeah, it's bad. It's just straight up sibilant. It's a not a good sounding headphone for music. And this is another example, right? People, you can post, oh, I just got a DT 1990 on Reddit, and people will love you for it. And the reason for that is because it was hyped up at the time when it came out, and a lot of people ended up buying it. And then because a lot of people have it, there's this, I guess, inertia behind it that it creates this canonical use case where people recommend something even though there is something better technically out there, and it's not actually particularly competitive anymore. And to be clear, it's great for its other aspects. It's just sibilant, like, and also overpriced. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a bit nuts in the treble. Deconi pads with the DT1990. Yeah, maybe that would be the way to go. To do some pad swapping on the DT1990, and then So I have no problem recommending it if you're pad swapping and you're trying to, or you're EQing and stuff like that. Yeah, in that case, totally fine, because again, for soundstage and imaging, it's probably one of the best at around its price point. Matt K, thank you. I listen to all genres with a focus on rap, hip-hop, and EDM. Currently have the Clear. What would I gain from a Utopia upgrade? And is the Arch good? I don't know if they're even I'm not sure if you can even buy the Arch anymore. I should actually check on that. So with Utopia, the main difference there is detail. If you look at the frequency response between the Clear and the Utopia, it's actually very similar. The Utopia has smoother treble, and that is going to sound weird to people who, I don't know. Like, I spent a lot of time comparing them back and forth, and even in the measurements, it's like, yeah, it's a little smoother there in the treble in the Utopia. But it's also, the Utopia is just more detailed, and that's really what you're gaining there. The Clear is solid, but if you want ultra flagship detail, it is the most detailed dynamic driver headphone out there. Yeah, Bayers are hella overhyped in the audiophile community. And it's because a lot of people own it, because it's like hype train equals confirmation bias, right? And then purchase justification. And so this is one of the reasons why this project that I'm doing, right, that we're doing, is trying to kind of cut through some of that stuff, some of the hype train stuff. Because, and I know I'm probably responsible for certain hype trains as well, but if you trying to help people learn how to read measurements and check this stuff in order to get a sense of whether or not you're going to like something, I think is going to go a long way to making sure people actually get stuff that is ultimately enjoyable and ultimately good. And so that's why I know there's probably a lot of manufacturers out there who don't like the fact that there's reviewers posting measurements of headphones, because it kind of removes the marketing veil a little bit, to get a little bit more actual tangible information to people. And so the marketing stuff, the story that gets told, is less effective. And but I think it's a good thing. I think it's something that this is this is going to be a bit of like a turning point in the industry where the companies that do really well are the companies that are going to be able to adapt to that, and they're going to be able to like recognize that there is such a thing as better and worse tunings, and getting tunings to be better out of the box and not having people rely on EQ. I think that's really what like the fact that Crin has doing a database, and we have the Gross as well, and a number of other people do. That's really just going to put pressure on manufacturers to be very careful and a little bit more intentional with their tunings, and I think that's a good thing. I should also caveat that people think that because I use a version of the Harmon target, which by the way, I that's just my target. That's not Harmon. That's two different pieces of Harmon that I've put together because I think it's more appropriate for the audience that I'm talking to. But yeah, people think that because I use Harmon that it's like, I'm indexing specifically for measurements, and I'm not. That's just like one part of the evaluation, and it's just data, right? Like that's the thing. I do think that headphones should be evaluated against the Harmon target. I think that's, or some version of it, but because it's predictive of what people prefer. It's predictive of preferred sound quality, and like to me, it's kind of crazy that we wouldn't do that. Like I know there's a lot of criticism of it, but like it's so ridiculous to me that people are critical of it, because if you don't have a target there, what's the point of showing the measurement? Like it's so much more confusing, right? If you don't know what stuff should generally measure, like if you're trying to get it to be palatable for a wide range of people, then showing a measurement without a target is sort of like pointless, I think. With that said, you can show comparisons without a target, and that's fine. So I think there is something useful there, but data without a reference point, like I don't know why. The other thing too is like people need to read that research, because it's not what people think. It's like people think, oh, it's a preference curve. It's like just it's consensus by masses, and therefore not good. That's not what it is. The left ear cup cord is fraying. This specific one is the demo unit that was sent to, like, I don't know. It was sent around to like everybody in the headphone community. So on our, not everybody, but many people. I think that's why that's fraying there. I expect if you take care of your headphones, that won't happen. But this one's been around the block. Yeah. I would use a different cable because I'm not a fan of these cables, but these use the Limo connectors. So what are you gonna do? A lot of questions here. Something I kind of want to do more of is we have a Twitch channel now, and I want to start doing some stuff there, but like I'm kind of questioning whether or not maybe you guys can let me know if this is a good idea, if you guys want this, but like I'm questioning whether I should just do like live streams on Twitch and just do this kind of stuff, or if I should do something with gaming or something with that aspect to it, because I think the downside would be that I wouldn't really be able to do the Q&A stuff while focusing on the other stuff as much. It would be more difficult depending on what it was. But let's see. Do you plan to check out the new Macintosh MHA 200 tube headphone amp? Probably. Like, I don't have any plans not to, but it's not on my radar. Which IEM Soundwise is on the level HD 560S? Yeah, you're right. It's hard to compare IEMs with headphones, but I would say Because the nice thing about the HD560S is that it has a very balanced tuning, balanced tonality. So in some ways, I would almost say I would say the Blessing 2, but not really. Because, I mean, I would say the Blessing 2, yes, but only in terms of its tuning, and it's also more expensive. So that's probably the closest. I think there was another one that came out recently that was, I'm trying to remember the name of it. The C Audio Yume is probably another one that's a lot less expensive, that doesn't have the same, I mean, it's IEMs versus headphones, but that kind of tuning, I think, is what you'd be looking for. But yeah, I think Blessing 2 would be the way to go. I'm trying to find a discussion question here. Because the thing is, like, a lot of you guys are asking for, like, what do you think of this amplifier or this thing, and I'm like, I haven't heard. Like, there's a lot of stuff I can't weigh in on, just because I haven't heard it. So if I don't answer your question, it's generally because I don't have experience with it. I see Andrew playing Minesweeper on Twitch. No, that's the thing, is I don't know what it would be. I'm trying to get Taryn to get some Dota 2 going, because I know he used to do that, and I have, but that's not my jam either. So something where maybe a few other people can do that. Can join. Do you prefer Harmonic Dyne Zeus or Hi-Fi Man Sundara? Sundara every day, easily. Twitch and gaming. The Odyssey guy does gaming streams to an audience of 1 or 2. It just doesn't go well together. Trying to talk audio while gaming. It is a challenge, yeah. If you're talking about Grover Neville, he has an audience at times, yeah. He's actually really good at that. I don't know how he does it. I'll actually hopefully do more streams with him in the near future, just because he's awesome. Maybe we can do something on Twitch together as well, because it's good to see that he's into the gaming stuff. And I think that the challenge is that, like, when you're focusing on what you're doing, right, you need someone to kind of like field you the questions, because you can't be reading chat, or at least if you are, you're going to be distracted, right? So it probably depends on what it is that you're playing. If it's something a little more casual, it's probably fine, but maybe that's not as interesting. I used to play a lot of people who don't know this, a lot of people know this already, but I used to play a lot of StarCraft 2. That was my game of choice. It's a strategy, kind of top-down RTS strategy game. And so, I'm more into that kind of stuff than the shooters, but I think a lot of people prefer, like, Call of Duty and stuff like that. So we'll see. Like, I definitely could stream SC2 if I wanted to, and it would be interesting maybe from people who are interested in that, but I don't know how many people actually are. Tuning is near perfect, but technical performance leaves a lot to be desired. Yeah, that's kind of what I would be. That's what I imagine, right? I mean, I think that's the same. I have that same approach to the 560S, kind of. Like, it's not that the technical performance is bad there. It's just not as good as the 6XX or 650. Tuning on the 560S is probably the best for the price, but the treble, like the lower treble, is just a little on the spicy side there. But nothing's perfect, guys. Like, except for the Susvara. But no, really, nothing is perfect. And this is also why, if you really want to take your sound quality seriously, you just get into doing some EQ. Can you ask Focal to keep making the Elegia and Clear, or at least improve their replacements, because the reviews of the Celestia and Clear MG are worse than the originals? I thought the Celestia was great. Doesn't have much going on for soundstage, and that's what people are really, annoyed by, but it's a closed-back headphone. I have different standards for closed-back headphones. And actually to the point where, like, I think it's a very the Celestia is so much better than the Elegia, like, for its tuning, like, very obviously better. And I know there was some reviews out there where people are like, oh, the Elegia. It's like, the Elegia has a tuning that, I think DMS is right about this. The Elegia has a tuning that it enhances the perception of soundstage. But I would take the trade-off. I would take the better tuning of the Celestia every day. Like, I own an Elegia, right? And I just EQ it. But man, like, the Celestia is such an improvement on the Elegia's tonal balance. That, yeah, it's just straightforward upgrade. But also, I don't have a line to Focal where I can tell. Like, I am not at all like, if I were to be like, hey Chris, get Focal to continue to make the Elegia, he'd be like, what? Why? Like, my opinion holds very little weight there. Here's a good question. What do you think are the flaws of the Harmon research? So I think the two things, and I've talked to Sean Olive about this, and he had actually a good answer. The first is that they were looking for what people preferred. So, okay, I should back up. And I made a whole video on the Harmon research if you're like really curious about that. But the research was not just asking people what they preferred. They had a specific starting point, and then they applied the preference curves to that and let people adjust bass and treble. And they picked a spot in the bass for where the crossover frequency would be for subwoofers. So again, all of this is anchored to trying to get close to trying to get a headphone representation that is preferred the same way that good speakers in a good room would be preferred. That trying to get that to agree is kind of the project there. And using consumer preference for small parts of that frequency response is what allowed them to do that, is what got them there. So again, you would have totally weird results if you just let people go wild with sliders. It was much more specific and targeted places where they were able to do this. So my issue with that is that they were trying to find out what people preferred, and they weren't necessarily asking people what they thought was neutral. And I think there is actually going to be a difference there. Now, I know Sean has done some other research that's kind of pointed towards preference and even spectral balance and neutrality being the same thing, but I have some suspicions there that you would get different results from what people prefer and what people think is neutral. Because even people who love like massive subwoofers in the bass and ridiculously car rattling, bass, they don't think that's neutral, but they still prefer the crazy bass stuff, right? Taryn is a bass head, right? I don't think he prefers, he knows, like, he prefers tons of bass, but I don't think he thinks that that's neutral. Or at least, maybe I'm wrong about that. He'll correct me, but I imagine at least that he thinks something like the Utopia is neutral, which it is. And but yeah, that's the first flaw, is that they didn't ask people what they think is neutral. And flaw is the wrong word. It's more just, I'm curious what the result would be if they did ask people what they think is neutral. If you look at the research, they actually have subjective statements there where people would, or like there's a bunch of categories there, like where people would report their, or express what they think. And they had some that were like even spectral balance, or some that were muddy, and some that were, like for various different things that they were trying out, in one of the studies at least. And a lot of them did, say that the Harmon, the curve that was actually applied from, the one that was part of that foundational starting point there, they ended up indicating that was the preferred, or the even spectral balance kind of neutral kind of sound. And it was either RRG or RR1G. And those were I'm told those were from Sean Olive's 2009 research. But when they applied those, it was indicated subjectively as well that was more neutral. But I still wonder if you had a wider panel of people and just grab people off the street and did that same testing, you'd probably have a preference curve that had a lot more bass, and then you would probably have a neutral curve that would have less bass. I imagine that would be the case, but that's just a speculation and hypothesis on my part. And the other criticism that I have of the Harmon research is that, so technically they didn't just end up with one target, but we only ever use one target. So again, there is segmentation in the data, but we only ever end up with one result, typically. And I think just like the Malcolm Gladwell soup cans thing, not soup cans, Malcolm Gladwell spaghetti sauce thing, the right approach there would be to use more of a cluster analysis and end up with multiple different target curves for people who have different preferences. Because I think there are groupings that would yield better results, like more like even more predictive results for people within that grouping, if that makes sense. But the problem with that is that that doesn't help with Floyd Toole's project of getting out of the circle of confusion, because then you have multiple targets, and recording like playback equipment in recording environments, mixing and mastering, stuff like that doesn't agree with playback equipment on the consumer end. So that's still a problem. Android, what's up, man? When are you gonna have guests on the show again? It's been a while. I don't know, man. You tell me whenever you're available. Actually, I was gonna have one for this one, but I went to bed before asking anybody. I've been so busy on so many other things. Like I know I have to do a lot of videos and stuff, but like I've just been ridiculously busy that I haven't had a chance to reach out to people. Like I've been meaning to get Android on, of course, and well, you Android, and actually I was gonna try and get Kryn on for this one, but usually with Kryn, because he's in I think he's in Singapore, so the time zone's quite different. We have to schedule that and figure that out. I'd love to have Metal 571 on again. I know he was in the chat and we had talked about that. We were gonna do that, and again I didn't time it or schedule it or anything like that. That's really the only reason we haven't done that, is because of timing and scheduling and stuff like that. But yeah, I will have more people on again. And also, yeah, Super Review is another guy I want to have on again. It was awesome talking to him. The Viggo Mortensen of IEM reviewers. The 2018 research is just EQing different a headphone to different more expensive / cheaper headphones. Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by that. And people liked the more Harmonish headphone. What do you think about this? Yeah, no, exactly. So a lot of the research that's done in Harmon research isn't just one study. It's a lot of research, and there are two kind of foundational curves that emerged out of the research. One was the 2013 one, and then they amended that slightly with the 2018 research. Just with a slightly different methodology there. But on the whole, in general, much of the subsequent research is done, much of it just sort of proves that their conclusion is correct. So, for example, the regional testing that they did, just like, yes, it shows one thing there, and it's kind of like it kind of proves a hypothesis or debunks the idea that there are differences, cultural differences and regional differences in what people prefer, which I was not satisfied by. But at the very least, there is a correlated outcome or a related outcome of that study that is just yet more proof that everybody preferred the Harmon target over all of the alternatives. So, yeah. Have you seen Oratory 1990's U-Sound Optimum Hi-Fi target that he derived from the BK 1974 speaker target? Yeah, he sent me that as well, actually. It's fantastic as it matches the world famous Android target. Yeah, so in many ways it's B&K Optimum. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Or at least I think I know that one, because he did send me that one. It's kind of like, in some ways, it's kind of like Kryn's IEF target as well. It doesn't have the base shelf, right? If I remember correctly. And I think technically that is also a good target. It is probably closer to like neutral, right? The only downside there is that we don't have yet the preference research that's associated with that target, and I think this is actually another potential drawback to Harmon, is the targets that were used as alternatives are maybe not as realistic. Like I know a lot of stuff disregarding the DF stuff, because I think a lot of that stuff is actually, if stuff is tuned to a DF target, it's likely to sound balanced at least. But it just turns out that people didn't prefer that. People just wanted more bass, right? I think that those targets, like even your target or Crin's target, the IF target, or the B&K 1974 speaker target, I almost think those would be better alternatives. If I remember correctly, the overall level of the ear gain was lower on those. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Android, but I'm pretty sure the overall level on ear gain is lower. Actually, I can check that because I'm pretty sure I have it. Let me just double check. B&K, are you talking about the B&K Optimum? Let's see. Yeah. This is exactly what I'm thinking of. So I'll show you guys the B&K Optimum. And I'll actually show you guys it in relation to Harmon 2018. If I can find, there it is. And that way we'll be able to see the differences. And match it somewhere in the mids. Oh, interesting. Okay. So let's just do this. So, right, Android, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the red line here is the B&K Optimum. And that's the one that you're suggesting? So looking at and then, this is 2018 Harmon for the green line, which is obviously crazy in the bass, right? So, well, I say crazy. It's just bass boosted there. It's interesting to note, though, that the Harmon 2018 is more well extended in the treble. It's interesting. I could see this working out, but I would almost want, because I even want a little more treble than Harmon, like up in the upper treble. But that I'm told is the reason why it kind of dips down here. I'm told that is potentially just a measurement artifact or something. I mean, something that is not ideal. And I think even Sean would say we probably shouldn't be using this information above 10K. When I was talking to Jude, he even suggested to lop this off in the target for representing stuff. And I kind of agree with him, but I don't think anybody else is really doing that right now. So maybe I'll do that eventually. If you had to choose one, DCA Aeon Noir or LCD2C closed. That's interesting. I would choose LCD XC, but I have an LCD2C closed at the studio that I need to evaluate and I need to measure, but I haven't had the chance to do so yet. So I'll have to get back to you on that one. Right now, though, I mean, the Aeon 2 Noir, if you don't care about macro dynamics, the Aeon 2 Noir is a solid closed-back planar magnetic headphone. Good tuning, don't need to use the tuning filters. Really, really good for, comfort and portability. It's back there. I do use it regularly. So I'd say, in that sub $1,000 price bracket, Focal Celeste and Aeon 2 Noir are the two, closebacks to get. And I haven't heard the Aurora Audio Australis. If Ruck ever decides to grace me with its presence, then maybe I'll be able to, put that one in the mix. But yeah, for now, for me at least, it's either of those two. Do you think the Harmon slash Sean all? Do you think Harmon slash Sean all have achieved their goal with their research? As far as I understand, they're actually done with this research right now, and maybe they'll move on to something else. And yeah, I think they did achieve their goal. Generally, it's not as comprehensive a result as like it's good science. You know, they have, I think they show something like 95% confidence interval or something like that, which is good. I don't like, I remember doing that kind of stuff way back, and having to do like one sample t-tests and all that stuff to ensure statistical significance and all that stuff. I don't get into that stuff as much anymore, but reading the research and knowing that that's literally their job, they're researchers, I'm assuming that they do the diligence and make sure that this is actually statistically significant. However, I do still wonder if we would get, what kind of results we would get with a much larger panel, with a wider range of people, and then also asking slightly different questions. So I think there are some of those that I'd like to see that kind of stuff done. It'd be interesting, I think. But yeah, I do think for what they were trying to do, I do think they achieved their goal. Rocky, thank you. Do you think the quality of headphones affected the Harmon bass elevation? The quality of headphones? Wouldn't the best performing bass headphones like Focal, ZMFs, as far LCD with that shelf be overkill? Okay, no, but this is a really interesting question. And it relates to the question again of macrodynamics and physicality and punch and slam. And as Android will tell you, this applies to IEMs as well, with balanced armature versus dynamic driver bass, where if you have bass level at a certain point for balanced armature drivers, and you have bass level at the same level, like exactly the same with dynamic driver, using a dynamic driver in the bass, the perceived result, the experienced result, is different. You have a different perceptual result, even though the bass level will measure the same, just with different drivers there. I'm explaining this terribly, but you know what I mean. Now, you take that same, I guess, puzzling idea, that same problem, you can apply it to over-ear headphones as well, like, Focal Utopia or HE6, which are very, very, very punchy headphones, very lively and engaging sounding headphones. And you compare that to the DCA Aeon Noir, which has much more bass level, but is nowhere near as punchy. So the problem with that's why I get why you're asking this question. I assume that's why you're asking this question, and I think it's a really interesting one to ask. However, when they were doing the research on this, they did use an LCD too. So, and I'm not sure what the bass, like, I'm not saying that's like as punchy as like a high excursion dynamic driver headphone is, but it's not like they were using something that was particularly that lacked that quality in particular. And they were also using, at least in the 2013 one of the 2013 ones, they were also using an HD5. Oh, shoot. It's not an HD580. HD5 something. But yeah, so I think it's hard to say that it was affected by this, by bass quality. Because I get what you mean. Now, with that said, I do. If you ever have a chance to listen to an original HE6 off of a good solid state amplifier that has lots of power, and you do boost the bass with a bass shelf to get kind of close to like 2013 bass at least, man, is it ever fun. It is. So to that point, I think if you elevate the bass to that same level with headphones that have really good punchy bass, it just gets more fun. Like, I think they would prefer it even more. So that's why I say, like, I don't think it would be skewed necessarily by headphones that didn't have that same kind of quality. I mean, again, I hadn't heard that same LCD2 that they were using back then. But I've heard an LCD2 since, like a more modern LCD2, and it wasn't particularly lacking in that punch quality. I mean, it wasn't as good as an HE6, no, not even close. But or like a Focal Clear, but it wasn't like an Ananda, for example. But yeah, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. I do think there is potentially such thing as too much, macrodynamic punch, but I really like that quality in general. So maybe for some people it would be too much. And also, that's the other thing. I do think that this study would have been different if they had used different headphones. That's another, I guess, caveat there. At least that one, like that initial one of those 2013 ones where they used the Sennheiser and then they used the Odyssey. But yeah, I think if they approached it again with something else, I don't know what we would choose, but I'd be curious what the results would be with a different headphone, with a different set of headphones. Have you listened to this as far? Yes, it is my favorite headphone. The problem with the Harmon target is trying to come up with a target when there are a lot of deciding factors on what people like to hear. So I would encourage if anybody like is actually curious about the Harmon research, I would encourage reading at least the main papers there, and because it really isn't what people think it is. It's been sort of misconstrued, I feel. But what you just said there about a lot of deciding factors on what people like to hear, so that would be a concern that I would have as well. Like, for example, people like stuff because it might make them feel a certain way, not necessarily because they think that it's good sound. And then I go back to that person with the Toyota Tercel and the crazy subwoofer in it. I'm describing Terran here again, but people like that stuff for all kinds of reasons that aren't necessarily related to good sound quality. They like it because of the visceral feeling that they get, maybe, or what it means for their social status, right? So in that sense, yeah, I think that is a confounding variable. But I think one of the things that Sean Olive proved in one of the other research, I don't know which one this is. I remember reading something about this, but basically it was that I think he kind of debunked that a little bit, that like there was that you could predict preferences, you could predict sound quality or good sound preferences, and that for the most part they did correlate with a more balanced kind of sound and not these other extraneous factors. But I do think even for ultimately what they ended up with, I do think a lot of that was probably influenced by it, especially the 2018 study, where they used more untrained listeners. And then I think a lot of those other factors would probably be coming in. At the very least, though, they did control for things like weight and comfort and stuff like that. So that wasn't confounding it. Folks are asking Android questions. Gotta get you, yeah. He's wearing Sesfara right now. Yeah, Sesfara is God. I prefer Sesfara or Utopia. Both are great, though Utopia is more forward and intimate and punchy, and Sesfara is more open but deeper sub bass. Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yep. Have I tried the Spirit Torino line? Nope. Is there an actual difference between Moondrop Aria and sound quality and Starfield for sound quality? Yeah. I don't know, man. Like, I have both here. For whatever reason, the Starfield sounds more detailed to me. Like, I think the Aria is actually, I think I like the tuning better on the Aria. I don't want to call it the Aria because like that's the Aria, right? Which is back there. But I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to say necessarily that there's a particular difference because I haven't had the chance to tip swap and use the same and tips for everything. I'm basing this literally off of a 15-minute walk that I had with the Oriya, and I thought to myself, I think the Starfield's more detailed, but then I wasn't using the same tips, so take that for what you will. But I also think, like, comparing the Starfield to the KXXS, I think the KXXS is more detailed. Even though they're tuned literally identically. They have exactly the same frequency response. But the coding on the diaphragm is different. And I actually think that's audible. So that's interesting. Have you heard the 1266 TCs? Yes. They are very technically impressive. Very detailed. The tuning is a bit uneven, especially in the treble. But if they can figure out the tuning, those would be solid endgame material for technical performance. The thing is, like, the only balanced sounding ultra high end planar magnetic headphone that exists right now is the Susvara. None of the others are particularly balanced sounding, and that's partially a limit on the, at least without EQ, right? So that's why I say, like, you just EQ them and then they'll be balanced sounding, and then they'll be, endgame, basically. Same thing with the LCD4, same thing with the Diana Phi, Diana Phi is a marvel of a technological achievement because it's such a small form factor and light headphone with ridiculous detail. So yeah, with the touch of EQ there, it's potential endgame material, right? But the Susvara is the only one that doesn't require EQ. I can't think of anything else. There's probably some E-stats out there that would be okay for that too. Most of the headphone community hasn't really caught on to tactile transducer. It's more seen in pro studios and home cinema enthusiasts. Tactile transducers. Do you mean like for like kind of like vibration stuff? I'm not sure what you mean by tactile transducers. But there is an element of, so like, correct me if I'm not taking your comment with the correctly here, but I've often thought that one of the reasons for the preference for more bass in some of the Harmon research, especially in the later studies, comes from a hangover that people have from being in an environment with speakers where you do get that physical sensation from them that you don't get with headphones. Like, speakers can hit you in the chest. You can get a visceral physical feeling there. And with headphones, you don't get that. And so what I wonder often is whether or not people are sort of trying to compensate for the lack of that quality. And so as a result, they're elevating the bass. So, but that's just a hypothesis. I don't have any proof for that. I just wonder about that. Oh, a wearable subwoofer. Yeah, that's okay. That would be interesting. Yeah, maybe the tuning preference would change if people had wearable subwoofers. Maybe, yeah. I don't hear many conversations about preferences for older age people. It is in the research. You can see it, but we don't use that. That's the problem. They did a study in 2015 regarding age, gender, ethnicity, etc. All of Wealthy 2015 factors that influence listeners' preferred bass and treble in headphones. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What is the most respectable Chi-Fi brand? Dunu. That's very, very easy answer. No, I respectable. Okay, I should say the reason why I like Dunu so much is because they are so transparent and forthcoming with information, both when it comes to customers, but also when dealing with people like me and other reviewers, right? There are things that Dunu has made that I've not been, enthusiastic about, like the Zen. I thought was an interesting IEM, but it wasn't like something I was going to give glowing praise to. Same with the EST 112, right? Interesting, but comparing that to like the Oracle, for example, or some of these other like even like the tuning of the like the Dunu's own SA6, like I had a little trouble with that. But at the same time, like if I say that to Tom, he is the most like, yeah, no, I hear what you're talking about and I get it. Like he's the one of the best people to work with in the industry. And we actually had him on the live stream as well at one point, and yeah, so I can't say enough good things about Dunu's relationship to the community. They are leaders in this regard, and if every audio company could be like Dunu in that respect, it would be amazing. Other companies, I mean, so that's for Chi-Fi brands, the ones that I like, engaging with the most. And then on top of that, they make some awesome sounding stuff. The SA6 is a benchmark for me there, and even there, and then they make some of the most comfortable IEMs. They have the best cables. Like they nail it with a lot of that stuff. So far, I should say, it's Dunu for me. But there are other companies, in across the rest of the world who, they also have really good relationships with their community. Zach, of course, ZMF. Like you gotta love ZMF for that. Odyssey is actually fairly forthcoming with information as well, so it's great to always talk to the Odyssey guys. Rawson as well, Rad Zero. Do people consider Hi-Fi Man Chi-Fi? I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe. I saw a question I was hoping to answer, but I totally missed it. Someone was asking about the Grado Hemp earlier. I do have it here. It measures just like a regular Grado, so with better bass extension. So it's better, yes, but I would not use that without the aftermarket pads, which I did order, and they did show up at the studio or at the office, and so I'll need to pick that up next week and then do some measurements with that, a little review on it. But the default frequency response is like, what? I can show it to you guys. Like, let's here we go. All right, so this is Grado Hemp with default pads, which are also particularly uncomfortable. I don't understand why Grado doesn't just like get into making their headphones with more pads that are actually usable. Or like whoever's doing those pad mods, just get into contact with them and find some way to collaborate and get them to make your pads, because not only is the tuning particularly weird with these default pads, but the comfort it's just bizarre. Like how anybody would want to release a product like that. It reminds me of on-ear headphones in a way. I don't really think you can wear them I can't wear them for more than like 15 minutes without pain. But okay, so the nice thing about this one is that it's a little more extended in the bass. You get some decent, I don't know, tonal balance there for the mids, until the massive 2K bump that is very prominent on most Grado headphones. This looks very reminiscent of other Grados, and there's no target curve that this is close to. Like I've never heard a target curve, and it sounds like this. Now it's not horribly imbalanced for harmonics, apart from this part here, but still, like I don't know, like even if you look at like diffuse field stuff, right, it doesn't really, and that's B&K, I'm pretty sure. This is the Gross Keymer one, so like even this one's like not really there, so I don't know. There's a lot of good Chinese brands. Don't forget stuff like Hollow Audio or like Hi-Fi Man, Matrix. Yeah, there's a lot. Actually, especially with IEMs, like the Chi-Fi stuff is the stuff that is the best tuned. Like I have no problem saying that. Stuff that's coming out of The Audio, man, and like RSV, and like they really are good at that. And this is what I'm saying is like the rest of the world hasn't really seemed to like keyed in on how much measurements do matter, and a lot of these Chi-Fi brands have, and that's why they're able to come out with stuff where the tuning is exceptional. And I mean, there are other companies like 64 Audio is one of the North American brands that's actually, really good at that as well. Generally, they've had a few misses in my opinion, but yeah. And sure, Empire Ears nailed it with the Odin, yeah. But for the most part, the stuff that is the best tuned is actually coming out of China. So whether it's RSV, whether it's and RSV, I have a hard time with the RSV because it does not fit. Like the nozzle is like way too thick for me. It's not comfortable. But the tuning is solid. Same thing with again, the The Audio Clairvoyance, Monarch, Oracle, Excalibur, not for me. I do see a little bit of, and SA6, of course, from Dunu. I do see a little bit of, hey, let's put a bunch of E-stats in here because it's new tech and it allows us to do more with treble extension or something. It allows us to do something more fun with treble in it. I think, why not just use more BAs? I understand the concern there about some of the E-stats. Like, for example, with the Oracle, I'll do a review of the Oracle, but it'll be a little bit later because I've got just tons of other stuff to do. This is it right. Oops, this is it right here. The tuning is really good, but the E-stat timbre there in the treble, I that's one where and same thing with the Excalibur. Like, I get it, man. I get there's sort of like a flatness to that E-stat timbre in the treble, and like a deadness to it. I don't know how else to describe it. That in some ways it almost makes it not as detailed as it otherwise would be, and so for that reason I think to myself, if this was just more BAs, maybe that actually is the limitation though, as far as the implementation is concerned. And something that maybe I'd have to talk to Tom about and get his take there, but John, the guy who does the The Audio stuff, to understand why there's this push for E-stats. But like, as an example, the Tri-Audio Starlight, which is right here, has the most insane treble I've ever heard in my life, and it feels like they just put 4 E-stats in there and we're like, let's just go nuts with the treble because we can. And it's bizarre to me. I don't know anybody who would actually enjoy that unless you had some sort of acute hearing damage. But that'll also get a review because it is also very detailed. And in some ways though, that one with the 4 E-stats, I don't hear the I hear the E-stat timbre a lot, but I don't hear it as blunting or limiting the details like I kind of hear it on the Oracle. In the sort of upper treble there. So yeah, I mean, that Starlight thing, that is very detailed. Yeah. Should I go for RS1 2E or take the plunge and go with the GS1000E? None of them. I don't know why. I got a hard time with that. We'll see though, because maybe that'll all change with different pads. So I'll get into the pad swapping and pad, because I think that's really the thing that people, if you're going to buy a Grado, expect to get into the pad swapping and modding and stuff like that, because I really think that's what it's for. It's literally a driver in a bare bones housing, right? The cheapest build you've ever seen in your life. There is detail there though, right? So it's not terrible, but the default tuning on these, I don't understand why why they wouldn't just try and get those other pads that are improving the tuning. You know what I mean? Also, yeah, I did listen to the hemp off of the Euphoria, and that was fun. Justin S., thank you. In your opinion, how much does the type of driver, planar versus dynamic, matter for specific genres? Also, anyone have headphone recommendations in the $400 to $800 range for someone who mainly listens to EDM? So I'll start there. My recommendation is Focal Alex, or if you can stretch it to 900, the or whatever the Clear price is priced at. I don't know. The Focal Clear, because they're very punchy headphones. Other than that, maybe a Harmonic Dyne Zeus. Again, there's not really that much within that range that I would be like, yeah, I get that, Yeah, I'd probably just say Focal Alex. That's that's the way to go there. And for the rest of that question, planar versus dynamic, matter for specific genres. So yes and no. No, in the sense that it doesn't matter what driver technology you're using, you can achieve something great and you can achieve something terrible with any driver technology. However, there are certain features and characteristics of each that it might be worth considering for the way that you want those genres to sound with each driver type. So often, if you want punch and slam, you'll want to go more towards the dynamic side of things. Not in all cases, because there are definitely dynamic driver headphones that don't punch very hard, but in more cases than not, you would want to go with dynamic drivers there. If you want really good control during busy passages and instrument separation, then you would go with the planar. So that's why I recommend planars for people who listen to a lot of heavy metal music, because it retains that control during busy passages. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter in the theoretical sense, but in a practical sense, I do think it does. LCD2 for EDM, yeah, you could do that, but that's a little out of the price range, I think. If you're choosing between LCD2 Classic and LCD2F, LCD2F is definitely better. A lot of people like the GX as well. I still think LCD2F is better than the GX. Someone with acute hearing damage, aka DT990 Pro users. Nah, the DT990 is not as crazy as the DT1990 for that treble peak. At least the overall level of it. It's just a series of peaks in the 990. Whereas on the 1990, it's like one particular, like, ridiculous peak. Or at least I need to get another DT990 in and cover that, because I haven't heard a recent one. So a long time ago. Rebel, thank you. What's your question? Oh, I see it. For Sundara, will I notice a difference if I move from 500 milliwatts to 1 watt? I would say it probably depends on other parameters. So, yeah, it probably depends on other parameters. I've talked to a number of amplifier manufacturers who say that the Sundara is actually way more picky than the specs indicate. So I don't really know what's going on there. But in theory, if you look at the specs, 500 milliwatts is technically enough. But yeah, I think it would depend on the rest of the what's going on with the amplifier. So, for example, something like this is not sufficient for the Hi-Fi Man Sundara. And I don't like, it doesn't matter how much output this has. It's what the volume level would be at. It sounds extremely claustrophobic off of this. But if you plug it into a Magni 3 Heresy, which has more power than that, it's totally fine. And Magni 3 Heresy is not expensive, so I would just say get a Magni 3 Heresy if you're worried about that. But technically, yeah, 500 milliwatts is probably all you need. Dynamic is old school and is dying like dinosaur in my collection. Depends on the dynamic. I mean, that's the thing, right? So again, Focal Utopia. This is the most detailed dynamic driver headphone out there. Now, this is at the high end of headphones. It's still not as detailed as the highest end planars, like Susvara, LCD4, HE1000 SE, Abyss CB1266, right? Those are all still slightly more detailed. But the benefit of this one is that the tuning is amazing on it. It's nearly flawless tuning. And on those other ones, except for the Susvara, it's a problem. Or something that you need to adjust. In particular with the LCD4 and HE1000 SE. I haven't spent enough time with a AB1266 to tell you what needs to be fixed there. But on the HE1000 SE, it was the treble and upper treble, and on the LCD4, same thing. And then the dip. Although I need to hear a more modern one, because apparently the pad change would have carried over there as well. So I still need to talk to Odyssey about that. All right, guys, I'll go for another 10 minutes here. But yeah, so I mean, to answer that question about dynamic versus planar, it's just a different presentation. There are things that each of them there are things that either technology do better at, and depends on what you want. But yeah, personally, I like planars better because I really like that control and separation quality that it has. TMS and Josh have a decent perspective. Zeos is not typically helpful for helping with purchase decisions. It's really so. I mean, I will say, yeah, I like for information, I like Josh and TMS. Yeah. I have to say, though, it is difficult to give people purchase advice because you're not those people, so you don't know what somebody's gonna like. And I can tell you what I like, right? And so, when I'm reviewing stuff, yeah, I use objective data there, and I think that's fairly important. And there is a range within, I agree with Jude on that idea of a range of neutrality. And so I think there's a range that stuff will sound good in. But at the same time, I don't know if you prefer good punch and slam or soundstage. I don't know if you care about microdynamic blunting, or if you just want good timbre, right? There are lots of different qualities that people will key in on and value over others. And so for that reason, it's difficult to say, get this or get that. And so in so many ways, I don't think my job is to give people purchase advice, because I think it's nearly impossible to do that with any, accuracy. At least when you're when you don't know the person, or you don't know the qualities that the person likes. So if you are able to qualify in some way the aspects that you really are looking for and that you like, then that makes your decision easier, because you can then isolate that in different headphones. But for people who are just like, what sounds better, X or Y? It's like, I don't like. I can tell you what sounds better to me based on the parameters that I like, but I can't tell you what you were gonna like. Do you think DCA tuning pads are a worthwhile purchase? It depends on which DCA headphone you have. Some of them, yeah, I think it is a requirement. But there are others, like the Aeon 2 Noir with the perforated pads is you don't need to EQ that. That's totally fine. Or you don't need to use filters on that one. But the problem with the tuning filters on the DCA headphones is that, yes, they do change the frequency response, but it's front damping the driver and blunting the microdynamic qualities. So for me, it was immediately noticeable. I was like, oh no. I didn't used to care about that quality, though. I didn't used to, to me, the front damping or over damping, it was like, eh. But now I can't unhear it, and that's partially because of having heard, more resolving, highly detailed headphones. And actually, with the TCA Aeon 2 Noir, it's a great example of this, because without the tuning filters, it's really detailed there for microdynamics. More detailed than the previous version by quite a bit. I would almost say the previous versions are kind of like, the version ones are like kind of blunted by comparison to the twos, for their microdynamic trailing ends of tone quality. But yeah, now it's to the point where if you use the filters on them, it becomes very obvious. You guys are talking about the Z reviews now. I don't know. Like he's doing his thing, and we're doing our thing, and they're total very different things. I don't really have much thought there on that one. Like we probably disagree. I disagree with him on just about everything, but not everything, but many things. But that's we have a totally different approach. And the thing is too, like I don't know, there are people who are in the community and other reviewers who I know what stuff should sound like. So I'm talking about Android, Crin, Metal 571, Max settings. I disagree with Max a lot, but at least he knows what stuff should sound like, and he's got experience. And all these guys have quite a bit of experience with what stuff should sound like. I can't say the same thing about many of the other reviewers out there. Not because I think they don't, but just because I don't know that they do. DMS is another example of somebody who, especially lately, his stuff's been getting really good. If I'm thinking about like the people who I like to confirm, am I crazy? It's the people who I know I can trust, and so it is typically DMS and Metal and Crin and Android, and so I wouldn't lean on Zeos for that because I just don't know. Like the pandas are super damped. Yeah, that's the panda is the. I need to get that back. Android, if you're still in the chat, where's the panda? Because the reason why I want to do some experiments with the panda and see if I can record the bluntedness, if I can capture that in a recording, and then compare that to like I've got the D8000 Pro here, right, which is like super detailed, and maybe EQ them to the same target or same thing, and see if I can capture the bluntedness versus the resolving quality in both of those. If I can capture it, it'd be really interesting. Poor max settings? Why poor max settings? No, I talk to him all the time. I'll say, "Have you heard this thing? What do you think?" I think he knows he knows what to listen for. Max has the pandas. Oh god, that's gonna be fun. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that review of his. Here's a good question. Isn't all this stuff subjective? I like this, you like that. We buy expensive things because why not? All right. So I was actually going to make a video on this, and I probably still should, but that question of like sound is subjective. It's actually not. To a point, there is a range of. So okay, it's the reason why it's not as subjective as people think. It's because all people, not all, but people generally have ears. All ears are different, but they have generally similar features to one another. And because of that, it's not actually subjective. And to a certain extent, Harmon kind of proved this as well. But I don't think that was really what they were kind of trying to do. But I mean, even the fact that a fairly significant majority of people, like the fact that it could predict that people would like it more, kind of indicates that it's not as subjective as people think. What stuff should sound like is very subjective. No, that's not true. Like again, there is absolutely room for preference. Like, don't mistake me for saying that, because I'm actually a subjectivist myself. I'm not an objectivist, and don't mistake me for saying that like no, everything is all just one target curve and just everything needs to be this one thing. No, that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that there are certain features of human hearing that are not like, it doesn't depend on the individual. There's certain features of human hearing that is general, that you can tune headphones to be in a range of. And then once that's hit, for everything below 1K, that is pure, not 1K, maybe 900 hertz, that is going to be where the preference stuff and the subjective stuff really kicks into gear. And this is also why in the Harmon research, that's what they let people adjust was, well, it was in the sub bass, or in the bass, it was like below 150 hertz or wherever that crossover frequency was for subwoofers. So, that is absolutely subjective. Where you want your bass level to be is a preference thing, right? It's not based on features of the human ear. Whereas all the stuff above 900 hertz or 1K, it is based on it is your ear, the outer ear and the ear canal and the eardrum, they amplify. There's resonances there that amplify certain frequencies, such that if you're just walking out in the world, your brain is correcting for these factors. Your brain expects to hear these elevations, and that's why ear gain is essential. And so for that reason, it's not subjective in the sense that it's not subjective in the sense that there is technically an optimal tuning that has a certain amount of ear gain. But it is subjective in the sense that you may want your music to sound a certain way that is muffled and muted. If you like muffled and muted kind of stuff, then yes, it is subjective in that sense. So yes, so I say it's not subjective up to a point, or it's only subjective up to a point. But I think people need to, like, the general statements that people make about sound is so subjective, as if you could just have a totally wild frequency response and somebody out there would like it. No, it's not subjective in that sense because we have ears. But the what you want your music to sound like aspect of it, yeah, of course it's subjective. Audio is literally a wave that physically exists, so it cannot be purely subjective, like the audio is the thing. So yeah. If it's heard, it can be measured, right? But the problem, so that's kind of my line, and it can be figured out because it is just a physical property, right? So there is no magic there's no mystery or magic, that is unexplainable. But I also think that we're not exhaustively explaining this stuff. But yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like, this is a bit of a philosophical question more than anything else, but like, if you're an externalist, by that I mean you think that facts of your experience, features of your experience depend upon facts external to them, which is what most people typically are. Most people typically think that, or at least it's intuitively correct. Then anything that is heard is potentially measurable, like, unless there are some certain psychoacoustic effects going on that are biasing you in one way or another. Yeah, like there are some headphones that are tuned with no ear gain whatsoever because the engineer didn't realize that flat isn't actually flat in a raw graph, like for example the PM50s. And in those cases, that might sound great for people who don't have ears, but like that, yeah, because people have ears, it's there is a certain range that that stuff needs to be tuned towards, and that means you got to have ear gain. Do you know of any research in audio that specifically target people who self-identify as an audiophile? No, but in some ways the Harmon research included that group because they included headphones that were audiophile headphones. So you brought up the Nighthawk. Yeah, so that's the problem with a lot of that stuff too. Yeah, Nighthawk's another one that doesn't have much for ear gain. It's a problem. It gets confusing, and people muddy the waters with the sound of subjective stuff because they bought something, or because somebody bought something and they told them it's good, right? Or because marketing tells them it's good, or because it was they paid a certain amount of money for it. There are all these additional confirmation biases and framing effects that make people think that they prefer something when, if they were doing blind tests, they probably wouldn't. And they would probably be, identified. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, this one sounds better to me." Now, as the Harmon research has also shown us, there is still a range of that, right? It's not as easy as just saying everybody preferred this one same thing. There were outliers. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, there's room for outliers to exist. But you look at that range, again, because people have ears, it's, as long if it falls somewhere within that range, and this is kind of borrowing from what Jude said about a range of neutrality, yeah, that's kind of what I think is important. There was a Harmon study on this too. Wait, who are you replying to? Oh, how much does total harmonic distortion really matter? Seeing all this discussion around the Abyss Diana V2, talking about the ASR stuff. Wait, no, it was the V2, yeah. And it makes me wonder if it's something one would really realistically hear. So, and Antroid says, Tem Olive Tatarunis Welty. Oh, this is a bunch of people. The correlation between distortion, audibility, and listener preference in headphones. The conclusion was linear distortion, yes. Non-linear, maybe not. And don't quote me on that. I've said this before. I have THD is not proportional to below a certain threshold. Is not proportional at all. It's not. Like people think that low THD equals good detail, and that's false. And I think you can prove this actually. As an example, I have a headphone, or I sent it away, but I had a headphone here that I can't talk about, but I had it here, and I was measuring it, and it measured like lower THD than I've ever seen in any headphone ever. Like ridiculously low, even when EQ'd, and it was categorically low res. Like there's no other way to say it. Like it was categorically not detailed. So I mean, it's enough of a counterexample to say that measured THD is not an indicator of detail, right? But there are also tons of other examples of this where you have better performing THD but worse sounding detail, and other examples like the Abyss stuff where you have better sounding detail but worse performing THD. So it's a measurable thing, but I think it's not something like it's something that is potentially having an influence on the experience, but it's not a straight line between good or bad measured results and good or bad experiences. I would imagine you would typically want stuff to be low distortion in general. Yeah. But it's not something that you can use to predict, before actually hearing it. It's not something like frequency response, for example. Like frequency response at least is predictive. THD is not. Past a certain point, like if it's like really odd order harmonics or like ridiculously high in THD, like some of the stuff that I've come across, like yeah, I mean then of course it is, but yeah. Have you ever had your hearing inspected with audiometry? Have you ever thought personal hearing curves as a help to picking the right gear? There was a thread on Reddit about this. I'm not sure if you were involved in that, but I did comment on that, and it was an interesting discussion there. With hearing tests, they're not so. There would be no reason to put much stock in a hearing test that was just meant to figure out where your hearing rolls off. As somebody in that thread even pointed out, that it's tough to do at those higher frequencies anyways, and so people don't do them, which makes sense. But also, it's not about how high you can hear, it's about knowing what stuff should sound like throughout the rest of the range. Having reference points is more important than being able to hear a certain frequency. And by that I mean, like, if you know what voices are supposed to sound like, guitars are supposed to sound like, pianos are supposed to sound like, drums are supposed to sound like, that's better than just being able to hear 18K, right? If you can hear 18K, that doesn't necessarily mean you know what stuff's supposed to sound like. Now it gets tricky with that stuff though, because in theory, it's possible for you to have not like as Amir has pointed out, hearing is nonlinear with respect to volume. So this throws a bit of a wrench into that. But I would counter that with the flip side of saying that even if there are some deviations there, for where you're, various different elements of the hearing that might have been damaged for somebody, like say they are constantly, sitting next to say they're a landscaper and they're constantly hearing the frequency of a lawnmower, right? And that's having an impact. I don't know, as an example, right? Maybe there's some effect there. At the same time, you would think that because the brain is constantly compensating for ear gain anyways, and the various different gain factors that we have, that over time this would be then compensated for as well. I think that there's a limit to that as well, but that then also runs into where the hearing will eventually roll off with age or actual hearing damage for the upper frequencies as well. But it doesn't necessarily mean that people would hear things dramatically differently. I mean, I think, yes, they probably would hear it differently to a certain extent, but not like, massively out of whack. But it is an interesting question. I think I don't think people need to produce show results, but I also think there's cases where people have damaged their hearing from listening too loud. And does that influence the credibility of their evaluation? I think in most cases probably not, but at a certain point, I mean, this is why one of the reasons why Tile retired is because his hearing rolled off over 9K or 8K or something like that, and he's like, I can't give proper assessments anymore. So maybe it has an influence. I think the other thing I'd be almost worried about is like the ability, if there's some correlation between upper frequency behavior and something, like technical performance of a kind, then if you lose that, maybe you lose the ability to pick up on that stuff, and then that's worrying. Or if you have really bad tinnitus and that starts to intrude on what your reference point is for what stuff's supposed to sound like, then that could have an influence. Has your conclusion, a couple more questions, guys. Has your conclusion that the A90 is not punchy to an unacceptable extent come from testing of multiple A90s, or just one? Just one, but everybody I trust who's tried the A90, not everybody, most people I trust who've tried the A90 have said the same thing that I have. Do you recommend the Focal Utopia with a Felix Euphoria or ZMF Verite with the ZMF Pendant for classical music? So weirdly, I don't actually recommend the Utopia with the Euphoria because I think the Euphoria's output impedance boosts the bass too much on the Utopia. Some people like that, but for me, I would recommend the Focal Utopia with a low output impedance amps and sound amp. Focal Utopia with amps and sound Kenzie with an 8 ohm out. That would be my recommendation there. If you're going to go Verite, I'd recommend Verite closed over open, and then Verite closed with pendant would be solid. Yeah. But I still think, I don't know. If you're going to get a Focal headphone with a low output, with lower impedance, like this is 80 ohm impedance, and then the clear is like 55, and then the closebacks are even lower, run it off of a lower output impedance source, like the if you're gonna go amps and sound, go with an 8 ohm out, one of the ones with an 8 ohm out, like a Mogwai or something like that, because then you're gonna get much better synergy there with the Utopia. But yeah, if it's a Verite, the new pendants, as far as I understand, they are all 100 ohm output impedance, and I think it's more to do with sensitivity. Like the Verite is 300 ohm, but you on the higher output impedance outs from the amps and sound amps, like the 300 ohm stuff, you do get a bit of noise floor there, and I think it's to try and find a better middle ground there. And so I think Zach made a good call on that one. But in theory, Justin could do that too, as far as I understand. You could ask him for a low output impedance, out. The 300 ohm stuff, that's really for like the Sennheiser HDA 100S and the 650 and 600 and that kind of stuff. Yeah. How much unit variation is there in headphones, especially from well-known brands like Focal and Dan Clark Audio? How can buyers tell if the headphone they receive has the intended sound or not? So there's always going to be some unit variation, largely due to the fact that pads are not as tightly controlled variables. I think more commonly with DCA, like the pads on the DCA headphones are so large that if that they're going to have more contribution overall. With Focal stuff, it happens as well, though. And I know there's that question about, you know, the one pad manufacturing run that maybe that wasn't the same, that I still haven't been able to get to the bottom of. Maybe I will in the future. But yeah, I think more than actual driver differences, which does happen too. You're gonna find that it's the result of pad differences. And so in that case, yeah, there is quite a bit of variation there. You see it a lot more commonly with more boutique brands like Odyssey and and that's also, again, partially because of the pads, largely because of the pads. But you do see it with Hi-Fi Man as well, slight variation there. So I think really I don't think there's any way to like hedge against that, because just about every brand has some potential for that. Honestly, Sennheiser is probably the most controlled, but even Sennheiser, there's going to be potential for some slight variations there depending on where it's made and the pads and all the rest of the stuff. So, yeah, I think there's always some potential there. Are you able to hear a difference between the Hi-Fi Man HE400i 2020 and the Sandara that's more than just airiness / closed-inness? Yeah, the Sandara is way more detailed. It's way more impressive. Guys, like the Sandara, like people need to remember it's on sale for $350 like almost permanently, but that was like a $600 headphone at one point or something like that when it came out. I remember when Tile reviewed it, actually. I think it was around that price. Now, I think it's more appropriate at $350, but it's a benchmark there. It's the best headphone at $350 with an amplifier. And it competes with the 600 and 650 with amplifiers as well. Different presentation, but those are the ones to get. And then they kind of beat everything up until the Focal LX and then the Ananda up there as well. Try taking the knob off of your A90. You will break your amp. Oh. You'll break your amp if you take the knob off? I don't know, man. That amp, I don't want to use it. Like, it's because of, like, there's also the ground loop issues, making it not particularly versatile with USB. It's just, yeah. Dude, Gary, if that's true, that would be amazing. I'd be looking forward to that. But I can't. I honestly, I haven't talked to Zach in a while. I need to reach out to him again and touch base and see where he's at, because I'd love to review some more of his stuff. Yeah. Sennheiser HD6 X0 pads are changing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, guys. Sandara doesn't really need EQ. You can add a bass shelf if you want. Yeah, I know you, Last Rhino. You're an HD600 apologist. No, I will say HD600 is a great sounding headphone, and so is the 650 with get a good amplifier there with like a tube amp or something. They're good. Yep, I've already filmed the OG HE6 video. Should be out on Monday, I think. Monday, Tuesday-ish. Don't forget the special cables. There's a lot of other questions I wanted to answer, but I haven't had a chance. I'll do one more question. One more. I'm looking for something here. You, Metal571, hot tub stream on Twitch. What? All right, Metal. If Metal's in the chat, let's do it. He's probably checked out by now. Yeah, LCD's out of stock. Like it's hard to get that one. Or XC, yeah. Oh man. Okay, so a lot of people who are asking about, like which one should I get, this one or that one? It really bears learning about frequency response with a lot of this stuff. Like I see your question there about the Nana and the clairvoyance. It's with IEMs, it's more challenging because there isn't a set standard target there. I know there's some Harmon IEM stuff, but people don't really take that as seriously, which is why it was kind of funny when she did the video on the IE 900 and referenced Harmon there. But people don't really take the Harmon target as seriously with IEMs. But look at what, like I would say the clairvoyance is pretty close to like a slightly warmer reference tuning, and look at like what the best IEMs are tuned to. And I say the best, I mean honestly, Crin's list is a good list for this, and then evaluate against that. Like look at the frequency response. If you don't know how any of this stuff should measure, you look at a bunch of them there, right? And then go, okay, well what's kind of closer to that, between those ones you're choosing, and then go that route. It's better to be safe, that if you don't know anything about how frequency response works, try and be on the safer side, because it is predictive of sound quality. Andrew S, thank you. I don't see your question though. Oh, I see. LCD XC is, wait. Thank you, Andrew S. If you have a question, hit me up at the Headphone Community Forum or Twitter or something, because like I don't see your question there. But thank you. Are you asking to decide between LCD X and XC? Is that your question? Because I'll put it to you this way: LCD XC is closed. LCD X is open. LCD X sound leaks out. LCD XC sound doesn't leak out, or not as much. And that might seem obvious, but it's not obvious to everybody. Base your decision around whether or not you need an open or close. You're okay with open, or if you want it closed. Because the main advantage of the LCD X is that it's noticeably lighter and it's more comfortable. Yeah, I might like the tuning better on the XC, but in both cases you can just EQ to the same target. So I would say probably LCD X for the benefit of being able to listen for longer periods of time, because it's not as heavy. Kiwi Ears Orchestra. Okay, I have another John Park special. John Park is my uncle's name, actually. So I just say John Park is my uncle. He's the guy who tunes the audio stuff, and also Kiwi Ears. I have one of the Kiwi Ears in here. I don't know if it's that one. I need to spend more time with it, though. Hot Tub Time Machine 4 starring Andrew and Metal571. Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. I'm going to take off here. Thanks to everybody for your questions. Thanks for hanging out in the chat. Good to see everybody. And we'll see you guys in the next one. But yeah, as usual, if you guys want like more info on like all this stuff, for a lot of it, I've done like posts with like measurements and stuff like that on the Headphone Community Forum. So just search for the products that you're interested in there. Alrighty. Next time I'll try and have somebody else on. All right, bye for now.